Hey, what's going on, guys? It's ETA Prime back here again. Today I want to test out Far Cry 5 on the Ryzen 3 2200G. Now I'm at stock clocks here. I have 8 gigabytes of DDR4 dual channel 3400 megahertz RAM, and I'm using the built-in GPU. Since this is an APU, it has a built-in GPU, which is decent for the price. The CPU is $99. You can build a full setup for under $400, and I want to see if it'll handle Far Cry 5. In this video, I'm going to test it stock, just like this. Then I'm going to overclock, and we'll also run a few benchmarks. I did a build video on my setup. I'll leave a link in the description. I've also made a few videos testing out different PC games and emulation using this 2200G. I'll leave a playlist down below if you want to check those out, but I'm really impressed with the performance on this thing. So first up, we're at 1080p. Everything's on low. We got to do this because this is a very low-end GPU. I also have the rendering scale set to 1, so we're not jumping that down any at all. This is 1080p, low settings. I'm going to run the built-in benchmark a few times. So first up, 1080p, then we'll go to 720p. Then I'm going to overclock the system. The CPU will be at 3.9 gigahertz. The GPU will be at 1550, and we're going to run 2 more benchmarks there. But I'm only going to show you one of these benchmarks. We're going to run through this whole thing real quick. I'm going to display the charts at the end of this benchmark for all the tests that I ran. So we'll have 2 benchmarks, stock clocks, 1080, 720, and we'll have 2 benchmarks, overclock, 1080 and 720. This game is really hard at 1080p on this APU, as you can see. Not really playable frame rates. But benchmarks are benchmarks, and at the end of this video, I'm going to show you some gameplay, 720p, high settings, and I'm really impressed how this thing performs. Now, it's definitely not top of the line, but you do get over 30 FPS, and if you locked it there, you could have a really enjoyable experience. One of the main reasons I built this system was to show people that you could play emulation and PC games on a cheap system. Now, you could always go out and buy a used system, but I wanted to do it new. This is a relatively newer APU, and I really enjoy using these things. I have the 22 and the 24. So when the benchmarks are done, this is how it will display. We have the minimum FPS, 21, average, 29, maximum, 30. Not really great at 1080p. We're going to move over here. Now, on the left-hand side, I have the stock clocks. On the right-hand side, I have the overclock settings. Top is 1080p, bottom is 720p. We're going to start out with the top charts. Left is stock, right is overclock. We didn't gain much at all. We only gained 2 FPS for the maximum FPS. Everything else was pretty much the same. Moving down to 720p, stock versus overclock, same thing here. We're not seeing much of a gain. We only gain 1 FPS for the average and 1 FPS for the maximum. But I have noticed that in real gameplay, not benchmarks, overclocking does help. So at 1080p, stock or overclocked, you're going to get around 25 FPS in extreme situations. Now that benchmark does show off a lot of explosions and things like that. There's a possibility you could net 30 FPS in a lot of the situations. But if you get into big gunfights, which this game has a lot of, you will be dipping down. At 720p, it's looking pretty good. You will be able to keep a 30 FPS stable frame rate on this game in most situations. Now, all of these settings were set to low, but I did test this out, overclock 720p on high settings, and I want to show you some gameplay here. I think it performs really well compared to these benchmarks. So let's get into it and check it out. I'm going to go into options and just show you my settings here. We're at 720p, but I did set everything to high. Now this will definitely get you started here. On low settings it does perform even better, but I wanted the best fidelity that I could get out of 720p with this APU. And I think it performs really well for a $100 APU. Now even though we can't run 1080 here, you could lock this at 30 FPS and play this game all day long at 720p. This is a budget build, and this is one of the best APUs that I've ever seen. Later on down the road, when GPU prices come back down, you can always add a discrete GPU. Buy a 1050 or a 1060, you could play this high settings, 60 FPS. Guaranteed. But the way it sits right now, it is very playable at 720p. I know a lot of people do want a game at 1080 and even 4K, but for budget builders like me, sometimes we just can't afford it. So this is what I have to work with right now, and I think it's a really awesome option.
Deputy, we've sent in a chopper to pick you up, so just hold your ground until it gets there.
Look! A flare! More Peggies are gonna be here in a minute. Use the mortar! That's gunfire. I'm going in quick! Oh, shit! Sweet Jesus! Sounded close. I'm gonna chop you to pieces! Don't you underestimate me! The call's sending reinforcements.
So yeah, Far Cry 5 is playable on the Ryzen 3 2200G, stock or overclocked. 720p is definitely the sweet spot for this system. 1080p can be done, but you will get a lot of frame dips under 30, so 720p is where it's at with this game. The gameplay portion of this video was done at 720p high settings, so if you went down to low or medium, you're going to get an even better FPS across the board. Really appreciate you guys watching. I did a lot of videos on this build here. I'll leave a playlist in the description. I've tested PC games, emulators like PS3, Wii U, PlayStation, Dreamcast, pretty much everything you can think of. If you could, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And like always, thanks for watching.